Hello. I've recently run across a man who so inspires me to play at a high level and achieve my high potential that I want to do it in every area of my life where I'm capable. And one area that intrigues me is the area of my marriage. So, asking the question, what is the spiritual purpose of marriage? And what do we have to do to make the most of it? I give you my hero, Jordan Peterson.
Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. That's a walloping statement to put in there at the end of those three sentences. I mean, the therefore comes as somewhat of a surprise, but there's an injunction there. Well, it's a good injunction, man. I'll tell you, people who don't do that, they have a hell of a time in their marriage. And so this is a good thing to know. If you are married, or if you're planning to get married, is like, you know, we have very strong orientation towards our parents, and for good reason. It's like the injunction here is that's secondary as soon as you're married. And failure to do that makes your marriage collapse. And then you deserve it to collapse too, as far as I'm concerned, because it's a reflection of your pathological immaturity and your unwillingness to extract yourself from the, talon-like grip of parents who are a little bit too much on the interfering side. But the injunction, there's a deep injunction here. It's very complicated. So one of the ideas is that the original Adam wasn't a man, like a separate man. It was more like a hermaphroditic being. And in that hermaphroditic being, there was a kind of undifferentiated perfection. And then that was split into male and female. And then that part of the goal of human beings is to reunite that as the singular unity that reestablishes the initial perfection. And that's actually the goal of marriage from a spiritual perspective. And you could read about that if you read Jung, because he wrote quite a bit about that. It's lovely. It's such a good idea. So I had these friends that went to Sweden to get married. They were from northern Alberta, but his heritage, their heritages were Swedish. And in this ceremony, they did this cool thing as they were being married, and they had to hold a candle up between them, right, while they were being married. And you think, well, okay, what's the candle? Well, it's a source of light. It's a source of illumination, right? It's a source of enlightenment. It's the candle that you put on Christmas trees in Europe. So it's the light that emerges in the darkness in the depth of winter. It's a symbol of life in darkness. It's the reemergence of the sun at the darkest, coldest time of the year, which is also associated symbolically with the birth of Christ for all sorts of complicated reasons. And so the candle's all that. And then the next question is, why do you hold it above you? And the answer is because what's above you is what you're below to. So it simplifies something transcendent. And so why do you both hold on to it? Well, because you're both supposed to hold on to the light, right? And you're supposed to be subordinate to the light. And so you ask, well, who's in charge in a marriage? Well, the light. That's the idea. So you come together as one thing. You're no longer two things. It isn't what's good for you, and it's not what's good for your wife. It's what's good for the marriage. And the marriage is about the combined being, which is the reassembly of the original hermaphroditic being at the beginning of time. That's the idea. And that's all packed into like these 4 sentences. The other thing about marriage, this is really worth knowing too, is that I learned this in part from reading Jung. It's like, what do you do when you get married? That's easy. You take someone who's just as useless and horrible as you are, and then you shackle yourself to them. And then you say, we're not running away, no matter what happens. Yeah, well, that's perfect, because then you don't get to run away. And the thing is like, if you can run away, you can't tell each other the truth. Because if you tell someone the truth about you and they don't run away, they weren't listening. And so if you don't have someone around that can't run away, then you can't tell them the truth. And so that's part of the purpose of the marriage. It's like, okay, I'll bet on you, you bet on me. It's a losing bet, we both know that. But given our current circumstances, we're unlikely to find anyone better. That's for sure. There's two things that come off of that. One is, people are waiting around to find Mr. or Mrs. Right. It's like, here's something to think about, man, to put yourself on your feet right. If you went to a party and you found Mr. Right and he looked at you and didn't run away screaming, that would indicate that he wasn't Mr. Right at all, right? It's like the old Nietzschean joke. If someone loves you, that should immediately disenchant you with them. Right. Or it's the Woody Allen joke. I never belonged to a club that would take me as a member. So that's a very interesting thing to think about. And so you're going to shackle yourself to someone who's just as imperfect as you are. And then the issue is you might be in a situation where you can actually negotiate, because you might think, well, there's some things about you that aren't going so right, and there's some things about me that aren't going so right, and we're bloody well stuck with the consequences for the next 50 years. So we can either straighten this out, or we can suffer through it for the next 5 decades. And people are of the sort that without that degree of seriousness, those problems will not be solved. You'll leave things unnamed.
Please excuse me breaking in here, but this is such a key point about the importance of naming things and the danger of things going unnamed if we don't have to face the truth. Because only when things are named do we really have to deal with them. He explained that earlier in the talk, and I put that at the end of this segment. So check it out after he wraps up this key point.
You'll leave things unnamed because there's always an out. And it's the same thing when you're living together with someone. You know that people who live together before they're married are more likely to get divorced, not less likely. And the reason for that is, what exactly are you saying to one another when you live with each other? Just think about it. Well, for now, you're better than anything else I can trick. But I'd like to reserve the right to trade you in. Conveniently, if someone better happens to stumble into me. Well, how could someone not be insulted to their core by an offer like that? Now, they're willing to play along with it because they're going to do the same thing with you. Now, well, that's exactly it. It's like, yeah, I know you're not going to commit to me, so that means you don't value me or our relationship above everything else. But as long as I get to escape if I need to, then I'm willing to put up with that. It's like, that's a hell of a thing. I mean, you might think, how stupid is it to shackle yourself to someone? It's like, it's stupid, man. There's no doubt about that. But compared to the alternatives, it's pretty damn good. Because without that shackling, there are things you will never, ever learn, because you'll avoid them. You can always leave. And if you can leave, then you don't have to tell each other the truth. It's as simple as that, because you can just leave. And then you don't have anyone you can tell the truth to.
Wow, I love that. So now he shows us some images from around the world: China, ancient Egypt, ancient alchemical images of the primordial or root being, the hermaphroditic being that preceded the breaking into male and female. And while these images are up, I'll tell you that we're now about to go on to the segment where he explained the power of naming things and the importance of naming things in order to bring them into our conscious awareness, where we have to deal with them.
The thing isn't quite real till you name it. And that's an interesting thing, and we don't exactly know how far that extends. It's certainly the case that things often exist in a strange potential form, interconnected form, where everything's confusing, like a massive confusion. Before you put your finger on it, name it. What's going on here? You name it. It's like it carves it out from all that underlying chaos and makes it into a grippable entity that you can then contend with. And you might say, well, it was real before you named it. It's like, well, yes, it was real before you named it, the same way things are there when there's no one there to perceive them. And it isn't obvious how things are there when you're not there to perceive them. There is emphasis again on this importance of naming in order to make things real. And sometimes people won't name things just so they don't become real. So, you know, if you have a relationship, which undoubtedly you do, and it has problems, which undoubtedly it does, you bloody well know that lots of times there's something under the carpet that no one wants to name, and everybody's thinking, well, as long as we don't name it, it's not really there. And in some sense, it really isn't there, because you can act as if it's not there and get away with it, at least for short periods of time. But as soon as you name that thing, it's like you give it form and it's there and no one can ignore it. And that's annoying, because then you have to deal with it or face the consequences.